All right, welcome to video 4 in our series on religions in the ancient world. The first video, we took a look at an introduction, and then we looked at Hinduism, which was pretty far out of most of my students' experience. Then in the next video, we plugged in Buddhism to Hinduism, which was complicated, but not as complicated as just out of the blue Hinduism. Then we looked at the last video combining the basic tenets or beliefs of Islam and Judaism. Islam being the youngest of our religions, its founder Muhammad being born in 570 AD, and Judaism being familiar to my students because we actually got a chance to look at some of that in class, which was good. Today's video, if everything goes correctly, we're going to look at Christianity and then we're going to wrap up. So, the first thing I want to do in this video, like I did with the other videos on world religions, is mention the unspoken objective. The objective of learning about ancient world religions is that we learn respect in the academic setting. These religions all exist today. And so if we, in our schooling, in our academic career, happen to be in a class who, with someone who has one of these faiths, we need to learn how we can show respect. And I guess one of the basic ways we can begin doing that is by understanding the basic tenets and that they exist in Hinduism and to an extent even Buddhism. Reincarnation. That's a thing that people believe in. Also, the sanctity of life and how all life is precious. It's extremely important. In Islam, the idea that it is a world view, that they have not only their holy book, the Quran, and their religion, Islam, but they have their own law, Sharia law, and they have their own courts for that. It's important to understand where Muslims are coming from. Also, the idea of a pilgrimage, which is different than any other religions that we've looked at. If you are able, both financially and physically, you are once in your life to take a journey as a Muslim to the holy city of Mecca. And there's nothing like that in the other religions. You can be a pilgrim, a religious person on a journey, but it's not a tenet of any of the other faiths. And so knowing that these things exist and that people who practice these religions, that this is part of their life, we can give them a little room in the academic setting and not immediately write someone off, no matter what they say, just because they believe differently from us. Because in the classroom, it's not appropriate. Today, we're going to do the last religion and then sort of a wrap up. So we're going to look at Christianity, and then we're going to pull it all together and see what should we have walked away from this series of videos with. Christianity is the faith that most of my students are familiar with, even if it's just by proxy. It's just someone who goes to a Christian church. Christianity began in the early 30s AD. The location is in Jerusalem and in Israel, Galilee, Bethlehem, the areas surrounding Jerusalem. The founder is Jesus of Nazareth. He was born in Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem. He moves to Nazareth. He grows up, and at the age of 30, he begins preaching. Now, the message that he preaches is not like what is going on in the area. And if we remember or look at Judaism, in this area of the world, in Jerusalem in 30 AD, the Romans had conquered Judah and made it Judea. The whole region was Judea. And the dominant religion from the people who were from there is Judaism. Now, there is a tradition in Judaism that the God of Abraham would send a Messiah or a deliverer to rescue his people. And as Jesus began to preach, he began to say things that looked like he was that Messiah. One of the things that Jesus of Nazareth did was that he taught through parables. Now, a parable is a story in which you use real life, very understandable subjects to teach a deeper spiritual truth. And in these parables, Jesus taught that it wasn't enough just to follow a religious law. Loving God and forgiving others from the heart is what he said mattered. In 33 AD, Jesus of Nazareth is crucified. And that brings us to a couple of the tenets that are extremely important in Christianity. In Christianity, the idea of resurrection and the idea of salvation are key. The followers of Jesus, he had 12 followers, one betrayed, and so there were 11. They were disciples, and the word, there's Snot-Rag. They were disciples, and now they will be apostles. Apostles are going to be ones who are sent. The idea of a resurrection is not like the idea of a zombie where somebody was dead and then they come back and they can't really do much. The idea of resurrection in Christianity is that when you are raised from the dead, you are to die no more. Christian teachings teach that Jesus of Nazareth on the third day was resurrected, that he rose from the dead. And the other idea is salvation. Salvation is the idea of the penalty of sin being paid. You are saved from the penalty of sin. And Christianity teaches that through faith in Jesus of Nazareth, a person can have salvation. And they too will see resurrection. So those are the main tenets of Christianity. Now, there's a lot more, as anybody who's ever gone to a church could tell you. But those are the basics. It is also important to remember that the word apostle means sent ones. And so the disciples, except for Judas, the disciples, the 11 who were left, became apostles. And these apostles were sent, according to Christianity, by Jesus of Nazareth to go and preach. The word is the gospel, and all that word means is the good news. And that is who Christians believe Jesus is. That is the Jewish Messiah. Now, the Jewish people reject the idea that Jesus of Nazareth is Messiah. But Christians believe that he is the Messiah. And so that's one of the areas where they differentiate. It's interesting. There's connective tissue, like between Hinduism and Buddhism. There's connective tissue between Judaism and Christianity, but with the place where they separate, in Judaism, they're still waiting for Messiah. And in Christianity, they believe that Jesus of Nazareth is Messiah. And by faith in him, a person can receive salvation, being saved or rescued from the penalty of their sins, and they will see the resurrection. So salvation, resurrection. Now, let's talk about groups or branches. For a very, very long time, there was one type of Christianity. One type. Now, if we had time, if we were in class and I could write on the board and everything, if we had time, I could explain how Christianity went from a religion that was persecuted in the Roman Empire to the official religion of the empire, to when the Roman Empire in the West fell in 476 AD. It pretty much was the only thing left that looked like what people could recognize from the old Western Roman Republic. And so the Christian church existed for a long time, from 33 AD up to about 1517, with basically one look. The leader of the Christian church for a very, very long time was the Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome is also known as the Pope. In 1517, you have the Protestant Reformation. That's where you get your other group. Everyone in the South has heard of Martin Luther King Jr. Well, his namesake, back in the 1500s AD, his namesake, Martin Luther, was a German monk. And he began, the more he learned about Christianity, he began to realize that there were some questions that he had. And so he nailed a list of his questions to the church house door in Wittenberg, Germany, and that led to a series of events which split the church. There were people who were protesting some things that the Christian church was doing. Now, they were Christians. They were Christians. They just had some problems with some of the things that were going on. And so they were protesting. Now, what Martin Luther wanted was not a divide. He wanted to see the church reform. He wanted reformation. But eventually what happened was the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant Church will become two separate groups. The Roman Catholic Church with its head, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, and the Protestant Church, which does not have a head, anything like the Bishop of Rome or anything like that. Now, you've got the two flavors. You've got Roman Catholic and you've got Protestant. That's as close as we can get to groups or branches in Christianity. Now, within Protestant Christianity, there's all kinds of denominations and different groups and affiliations. You've got the Baptist and the Methodist and the Presbyterian and the Anglican, and there's a huge variety, more and more and more, that are denominations of Protestant Christianity, those people who in the beginning were protesting what the Church of Rome were doing. But for the sake of this video, Christianity, Jesus of Nazareth is its founder, started in the early 30s AD, around Jerusalem, Galilee, Nazareth, Bethlehem. After the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, his followers, the disciples, become apostles, and they go out sharing the gospel or the good news. And the basic tenets that we can talk about on this video are going to be resurrection, being raised from the dead to not die ever again, and the idea of salvation, which is being rescued or saved from the penalty of committing of the sins that people have committed. And there are two groups. There's Roman Catholic and there's Protestant. Now, there's a lot more that we can go into, and that leads me into the conclusion of the video. I would encourage anyone who is interested, go to page 374, 375, 376 in your state provided textbook and read from the textbook what the World History book says Christianity is. That will give us a sense of what Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews might feel when they read the textbook. Maybe they're saying, well, that's not anything like what we believe, or, there's a whole lot more to it than that. Well, we can get a sense of that, those who are familiar with Christianity, by reading the textbook on Christianity. That helps us understand our own bias. It helps us realize that we do have a particular point of view or a worldview, and it does kind of bleed into the way we see the world around us. Now, wrap up. Things that I would like you to keep in mind. As we leave the unit on world religions, really all we can say is that we've come into contact with Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. We know if there was a founder, who that founder was, the region of the world where it started, a little bit of the history, some of the main tenets of those faiths, and we also know just a little bit about groups or branches, if they have groups or branches. That thin of an overview is enough for us to go armed into the high school and be able to understand not only classmates, but to look at history a little bit. There are some observations that I want to make here at the end of looking at these religions. The first one is going to be, we do not need to underestimate the importance of faith in the lives of the people that we have studied and that we will study. Now, it kind of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Everyone is not of faith. There are people who simply do not have a faith. But to understand that, number one, there are people who have faith, and number two, that faith really has an impact on the decisions that they make, the life that they live, that's a key part of understanding history. Now remember, This was not a theology unit. This was a world history unit. Excuse me. We're looking at the everything from where did it start, who founded it, what are the major tenets, what are the groups and branches. We're trying to get an overview because it matters. We can make observable statements of historical fact once we understand these things. Don't underestimate the importance of history and the impact that it's had. It would be a mistake to underestimate the impact. Second one here. It'd be a mistake to underestimate the impact of what history will call a holy war. If you have two groups of people, two people groups, who have opposing faith systems, or if they go to war, armed conflict, based on the tenets of their religion, it would be a mistake, number one, not to know that's a thing. You need to know holy wars were and are today in the world. Very real. And number two, they can be particularly brutal because of the mindset of the people who are waging those wars. And so holy wars were and are a thing, and it's very important if you're going to get an understanding of the scope of history to know that holy wars existed, and they are particularly brutal. The third thing I'd kind of like you to get, I guess, get a grasp of would be that understanding why people do what they do is a component of history. Learning that people of faith have different tenets to their faith or different systems that they believe goes a long way, especially in ancient history, in helping understand why some decisions, some battles, some treaties, some economic positions and policies were taken. So understanding the way that people's faith works in the practical can be valuable to a student of history. And I guess the last thing is, if you remember back, complex religions are part of what I had my students learn, the 8 features of a civilization. They are an indicator of an advanced level of a people group in ancient history. There's every reason to look objectively at the complex religions of civilizations and the maybe not so complex religions of groups that are not civilizations. Because in that we can find a quality of the character of the people. It's very interesting to do. I would recommend strongly that you look in the textbook around page 370. Check out the section on Christianity. Go to what I posted on Classroom, that introduction to the unit on world religions. There are page numbers there for all of these. Familiarize yourself with these things and go back over the videos, looking at where they came from, who were the founders, what are their basic tenets, what are the groups and branches. All of these things help us make sense of the world that was and a little bit of the world that is today. See you guys soon in Zoom.